Sarah Martinez had always been the kind of person who blended into the background. At 34, she moved through the pediatric ward at St. Mary's Hospital with a quiet efficiency that her colleagues had come to appreciate over the past 2 years. Her uniform was always crisp, her brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her interactions with patients and families were gentle but professional. Most people who worked with her knew very little about her life before nursing school, and Sarah preferred it that way. The morning shift on the pediatric unit began like any other Tuesday in October. Sarah arrived at 6:30, 15 minutes before her shift officially started, just as she always did. She used those extra minutes to review patient charts and mentally prepare for the day ahead. The unit housed 26 beds, currently occupied by children ranging from newborns to teenagers, each with their own complex medical needs and worried families hovering nearby. Dr. Jennifer Chin, the attending pediatrician, greeted Sarah with a tired smile as she emerged from the break room with her second cup of coffee. The two women had developed a comfortable working relationship over the months, built on mutual respect and shared dedication to their young patients. "How's little Emma doing this morning?" Dr. Chin asked, referring to a 7-year-old girl who had been admitted 3 days earlier with complications from pneumonia. "Her fever broke around 4 this morning," Sarah replied, consulting her notes. "Her oxygen saturation has been stable, and she actually asked for chocolate pudding with breakfast, which is the first time she's shown interest in food since admission." Dr. Chin nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what we want to hear. What about the Johnson baby?" Sarah's expression grew more serious. "He's stable, but still requiring respiratory support. The parents spent the night, and Mom is pretty anxious. I've been trying to give her small updates throughout the night to help ease her worries." This was typical of Sarah's approach to nursing. She understood that treating the patient meant supporting the entire family, especially in pediatrics where parents were often more frightened than the children themselves. Her colleagues had noticed her particular gift for calming anxious families, though they attributed it to her naturally gentle demeanor rather than any specialized training. What they didn't know was that Sarah's calm under pressure came from 8 years of military service, including 2 deployments to Afghanistan as a combat medic. She had learned to make life-or-death decisions in situations where panic could mean the difference between saving a life and losing it. The skills that had served her well in military hospitals and war zones translated seamlessly to civilian healthcare, though she rarely spoke about her previous career. The morning progressed smoothly. Sarah administered medications, updated charts, and provided comfort to both patients and families. She helped a nervous mother learn how to properly hold her premature baby during skin-to-skin contact, demonstrated breathing exercises with a teenage boy recovering from surgery, and managed to coax a smile from a usually sullen 8-year-old who had been in the hospital for over a week. Around 11 o'clock, a new patient arrived, Marcus Williams, a 4-year-old who had been transferred from the emergency department after a playground accident resulted in a broken arm and possible concussion. He was frightened and crying for his mother, who was still completing paperwork downstairs. Sarah immediately went to his bedside, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. "Hi Marcus, I'm Sarah, and I'm going to be taking care of you today," she said, crouching down to meet his eyes at his level. "I know this is scary, but you're safe here, and we're going to make sure you feel better soon." The little boy looked at her with wide, tear-filled eyes. "I want my mommy," he whispered. "I know you do, sweetheart. She'll be up here very soon. While we're waiting for her, can you tell me about your favorite toy? I bet it's something really cool." As Marcus began to tell her about his toy dinosaur collection, Sarah performed a gentle assessment, checking his pupils for signs of concussion and ensuring his arm was properly immobilized. Her movements were practiced and efficient, but so gentle that Marcus barely noticed the examination. This ability to multitask while maintaining a calm, reassuring presence was something Sarah had developed during her military service. In field hospitals, she had often found herself treating injured soldiers who were scared and disoriented, sometimes in chaotic conditions with limited resources. She had learned to be both clinically competent and emotionally supportive, skills that served her well in pediatric nursing. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the head of pediatrics, observed Sarah's interaction with Marcus from across the room. She had been considering Sarah for a leadership position within the unit, impressed by her clinical skills and the way other nurses looked to her for guidance in difficult situations. There was something about Sarah that inspired confidence, though Dr. Hoffman couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. As the lunch hour approached, the unit settled into its usual rhythm. Many of the children were napping, exhausted by their morning medications and treatments. The nursing station was relatively quiet, with only the soft beeping of monitors and the occasional cry of a baby breaking the peaceful atmosphere. Sarah was reviewing the afternoon medication schedule when she noticed something unusual. Through the large windows that separated the nursing station from the main corridor, she saw a man walking purposefully toward the pediatric unit. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, which wasn't unusual for a visitor, but something about his posture and the way he was moving set off alarm bells in her mind. It was subtle, the way his shoulders were set, the tension in his stride, the fact that his hands were buried deep in his jacket pockets in a way that suggested he was concealing something. Most people would have dismissed these observations as paranoia, but Sarah's military training had taught her to read body language and assess potential threats. Her instincts, honed by years in combat zones, were screaming that something was wrong. She glanced around the nursing station and saw that her colleagues were busy with their own tasks. Lisa Thompson, a newer nurse, was updating patient charts. Mike Rodriguez was on the phone with a pharmacy, and Janet Williams was helping a family navigate the hospital's visitor policies. None of them seemed to have noticed the approaching man, and Sarah didn't want to alarm them unnecessarily if she was wrong about the threat. But as the man drew closer, Sarah's concerns intensified. His gait was purposeful and determined, not the hesitant walk of someone trying to find a patient's room. His eyes were scanning the unit in a way that suggested he was looking for something specific, and there was a hardness to his expression that made Sarah's stomach clench with familiar anxiety. When he stopped just outside the unit's main entrance, and appeared to be reaching for something in his jacket, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that her instincts were correct. Years of military training kicked in, and her mind immediately began formulating a response plan. She glanced around the unit, quickly cataloging the locations of patients, staff, and visitors. There were currently 8 children in the main ward area, along with 5 family members and 4 staff members. The man pulled his hand from his jacket, and Sarah saw the distinctive shape of a handgun. Time seemed to slow down as her training took over completely. She had perhaps seconds before he entered the unit, and began whatever he had planned. In that moment, all of her military experience, the tactical training, the combat situations, the split-second decision-making, came flooding back. But for now, she was still just Sarah Martinez, the quiet pediatric nurse that everyone thought they knew. None of her colleagues had any idea that they were about to see a completely different side of the woman they had worked alongside for 2 years. None of them knew that beneath her gentle exterior was someone who had been trained to handle exactly this type of situation. As the man began to move toward the entrance of the pediatric unit, Sarah took a deep breath and prepared to do whatever was necessary to protect the children and families in her care. Her previous life as a soldier was about to collide with her current life as a nurse, and nothing would ever be the same again. The peaceful Tuesday morning was about to become anything but ordinary, and Sarah Martinez was about to reveal skills that would shock everyone who thought they knew her. In the next few moments, the quiet nurse who had spent 2 years blending into the background would step forward and show exactly what she was capable of when the lives of innocent children were at stake. The man stepped through the entrance to the pediatric unit, and Sarah saw him clearly for the first time. He was tall and thin, probably in his late 30s, with unkempt hair and clothes that looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot and wild, darting around the room with an intensity that made Sarah's military-trained instincts scream danger. Most alarming was the way he held the gun, not like someone who was uncertain about using it, but like someone who had already made his decision. "Where is she?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the normally quiet unit. "Where's my daughter?" The immediate effect was chaos. A mother visiting her sick child screamed and pulled her son closer to her chest. Mike Rodriguez dropped the phone he had been holding, and Lisa Thompson froze at the nursing station, her face going pale with terror. Several children began crying, sensing the fear of the adults around them even if they didn't understand what was happening. But Sarah didn't freeze. Years of combat experience had taught her that the first moments of a crisis were crucial, and that hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. While her colleagues were still processing what was happening, Sarah was already moving, her military training taking complete control. "Everyone stay calm," she said in a voice that was firm but not panicked. Her tone carried an authority that none of her colleagues had ever heard from her before. "Sir, I'm going to help you find your daughter, but I need you to lower the weapon so we can talk safely." The man swung the gun towards Sarah, and she could see his finger resting dangerously close to the trigger. "Don't tell me what to do! They took her from me, and I want her back now." Sarah raised her hands slightly, a gesture that appeared submissive but actually positioned her for quick movement if necessary. She had learned in combat situations that de-escalation was always the preferred first option, but she needed to be ready for anything. "I understand you're upset about your daughter," Sarah said, taking a small step closer while keeping her voice steady. "What's her name? I can help you look for her." Behind her, she could hear Lisa whispering frantically into a phone, presumably calling security or the police. Sarah hoped help was coming, but she knew from experience that in situations like this, you couldn't count on rescue arriving in time. She would need to handle this herself, at least until backup arrived. "Her name is Chloe," the man said, his voice breaking slightly. "Chloe Patterson. She's 6 years old, and they won't let me see her. They said I'm not allowed, but she's my daughter." Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. She knew there was no Chloe Patterson currently admitted to the pediatric unit, but that didn't mean the man was lying. It was possible the child was in another part of the hospital, or that there had been some kind of custody dispute that had led to restrictions on his visitation rights. "Mr. Patterson," Sarah said, using his presumed last name to establish a connection, "I want to help you find Chloe. But having the gun out is scaring the other children here, and that's not going to help us solve this problem. Can you lower it so we can focus on finding your daughter?" The man looked around the room as if seeing the terrified children and families for the first time. For a moment, his expression softened, and Sarah thought she might be making progress. But then, his face hardened again, and he raised the gun higher. "No. They've been lying to me for weeks, telling me she's not here, but I know she is. I saw her being brought in yesterday. I'm not leaving without her." Sarah realized that she was likely dealing with someone who was either under the influence of drugs or experiencing some kind of mental health crisis. His story didn't match the reality of the situation, but in his mind, it was completely real. This made him even more dangerous, because rational arguments might not work on someone who wasn't thinking rationally. She needed to change tactics. Instead of trying to convince him he was wrong, she would work within his version of reality while keeping everyone safe. "Okay, Mr. Patterson," she said, taking another small step closer. "I believe you when you say Chloe is here. But these other children aren't Chloe, right? So pointing the gun at them isn't helping us find her. Why don't you and I go look for her together? I know this hospital very well, and I can help you check all the places she might be." During her years as a combat medic, Sarah had encountered situations where soldiers were disoriented or traumatized to the point where they weren't thinking clearly. She had learned that sometimes you had to meet people where they were mentally, rather than trying to force them to see reality as you understood it. The man seemed to consider her offer. "You'll really help me find her? You're not just trying to trick me?" "I'm not trying to trick you," Sarah said honestly. "I'm a nurse here, and my job is to take care of children. If Chloe is somewhere in this hospital and needs her father, then I want to help reunite you with her. But first, I need to know that everyone here is safe." As she spoke, Sarah was using skills she had learned in hostage negotiation training during her military service. The key was to build rapport with the subject while gradually gaining more control of the situation. She needed to keep him talking while positioning herself to act if necessary. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see that Mike Rodriguez had quietly moved to shield a family with a young baby, positioning himself between them and the gunman. Lisa had managed to get several patients and visitors into a room at the far end of the unit, though Sarah could still hear muffled crying from behind the closed door. "What if we make a deal?" Sarah suggested, taking another small step closer. She was now close enough that she could potentially reach the weapon if she moved quickly, but she knew she would only get one chance. "I'll personally escort you to look for Chloe in every part of this hospital. But in exchange, you need to let these families leave with their children, because they're not part of this situation." The man's hand was shaking now, whether from nerves, exhaustion, or chemical influence, Sarah couldn't tell. But the trembling made him even more dangerous, because an accidental discharge could happen at any moment. "I don't know," he said, his voice becoming more agitated. "What if it's a trick? What if you're just trying to get me away from here so they can hide her somewhere else?" Sarah could hear sirens in the distance now, growing louder as they approached the hospital. She hoped it was police or security, but she also knew that the arrival of law enforcement could escalate the situation if not handled carefully. Some people in crisis situations became more desperate when they realized they were running out of time. "Mr. Patterson," she said, using his name again to maintain the personal connection, "I give you my word as someone who understands what it's like to fight for something important. I spent 8 years in the army, and I know what it means to never leave anyone behind. If Chloe is in this hospital, we will find her together." This was the first time Sarah had mentioned her military background to any of her colleagues, and she could see the surprise on Mike's face even from across the room. But she needed to establish credibility with the gunman, and her military service was something he might relate to. The man's expression changed slightly. "You were in the army?" "Yes," Sarah said. "I was a combat medic. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and I understand what it's like when you feel like the system is working against you. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when everyone else is telling you to give up." She was walking a fine line here, validating his feelings without endorsing his methods. But she could see that her military background was creating a connection that might give her the leverage she needed. "They keep telling me I can't see her," the man said, and for the first time, his voice held more sadness than anger. "They say it's not safe, but I'm her father. I would never hurt her. I just want to make sure she's okay." Sarah sensed an opportunity. The man's anger was giving way to desperation and grief, which meant he might be more open to reason. But she also knew that people in this emotional state could be unpredictable, swinging quickly between different emotions. "I believe you love her," Sarah said softly. "And I can see how much this is hurting you. But right now, having the gun out is making it impossible for anyone to help you see Chloe. The police are going to be here soon, and when they arrive, this situation is going to get a lot more complicated. If we're going to find your daughter, we need to do it now, while we can still work together." The sirens were getting louder, and Sarah could hear the sound of multiple vehicles pulling up outside the hospital. Time was running out, and she needed to make a decision about how to handle this situation before it was taken out of her hands. The man looked toward the windows, hearing the sirens as well. His grip on the gun tightened, and Sarah realized that the approaching police might push him to make a desperate choice. She had perhaps minutes, or even seconds, before this situation reached a crisis point where someone could get seriously hurt. Everything she had learned in 8 years of military service was about to be put to the ultimate test, not in a war zone thousands of miles from home, but in the pediatric unit where she had quietly worked for 2 years. The skills that had kept her and her fellow soldiers alive in combat were now the only things standing between a desperate man with a gun and the innocent children she had sworn to protect. Sarah could hear heavy footsteps in the corridor outside the pediatric unit, and she knew that security or police officers were positioning themselves just beyond the entrance. The sound seemed to trigger something in Mr. Patterson, and his grip on the weapon tightened as his eyes darted toward the doorway. "They're here," he said, his voice rising with panic. "They're here to stop me from seeing Chloe. They're going to arrest me, and I'll never see my daughter again." Sarah recognized the signs of someone who was about to make a desperate decision. In combat situations, she had seen soldiers and civilians reach the same breaking point, where fear and desperation overrode rational thinking. She had perhaps seconds before he either surrendered or did something that would end badly for everyone involved. "Mr. Patterson," she said, stepping closer and deliberately positioning herself between him and the other people in the unit. "Look at me. Focus on me, not on them. We still have time to find Chloe, but I need you to trust me." Her voice carried a calm authority that had been forged in life-or-death situations overseas. She was drawing on every technique she had learned for de-escalating volatile situations, combined with her natural instincts as a nurse who genuinely cared about helping people in crisis. "You said you'd help me," the man said, his voice breaking. "You promised we'd find her together." "And I meant it," Sarah replied. "But I can't help you if you're pointing that gun at innocent people. These children have nothing to do with your situation with Chloe. They're just sick kids who need medical care." Through the glass windows of the nursing station, Sarah could see armed officers taking positions in the corridor. She knew they were probably discussing tactical options, but she also knew that any sudden movement could trigger violence. She needed to resolve this before the police made the decision to intervene forcefully. "What I'm going to do," Sarah said, speaking slowly and clearly, "is walk over to the phone and call the social worker who handles family situations like this. She'll be able to tell us exactly where Chloe is and what we need to do for you to see her. But I can't make that call while you have the gun pointed at people." "Can you lower it, just while I make the call?" It was a calculated risk. Sarah was hoping that giving the man a specific action plan would help him feel more in control of the situation, while also buying time for the police to assess their options. But she was also prepared to act if he made any aggressive moves toward the patients or staff. Mr. Patterson looked around the room again, seeming to really see the frightened children for the first time. A 7-year-old girl was crying silently in her bed, clutching a stuffed animal. A teenage boy was trying to comfort a younger patient while keeping his own fear under control. The reality of what he was doing seemed to finally penetrate his desperation. "I never wanted to scare anyone," he said, his voice much quieter now. "I just want to see my daughter. It's been 3 weeks since they let me visit her." Sarah sensed that this was the moment when the situation could shift. The man's anger was giving way to exhaustion and sadness, which made him both more reasonable and more unpredictable. People in emotional crisis sometimes made sudden movements that could be misinterpreted by law enforcement. "I know you don't want to hurt anyone," Sarah said gently. "And I can see how much you love Chloe. But right now, the best thing you can do for her is to put the gun down so we can focus on solving this problem together." She was now close enough to the man that she could potentially disarm him if necessary, but she preferred to avoid physical confrontation if possible. Her military training had taught her that violence should always be the last resort, especially when innocent bystanders were involved. "What if they arrest me?" Mr. Patterson asked. "What if I put the gun down, and they just take me away without helping me see Chloe?" Sarah glanced toward the corridor where she could see officers waiting. She needed to give him some kind of assurance, but she also couldn't make promises she couldn't keep. "Here's what I can tell you," she said. "I've worked with the police and security here before, and they're good people who want to resolve this peacefully. If you cooperate with them, that's going to work in your favor. But if this situation escalates, it's going to be much harder for anyone to help you." Behind her, Sarah could hear Mike Rodriguez quietly moving patients and families further away from the immediate area. She was grateful for his quick thinking, but she also knew that any sudden movements could set off the gunman again. "Mr. Patterson," she continued, "I'm going to make you a promise. If you put the weapon down right now, I will personally make sure that someone explains to you exactly what's happening with Chloe's situation. I'll stay with you while you talk to the social worker, and I'll advocate for you to have appropriate contact with your daughter, assuming it's safe for both of you." The man's hand was shaking more visibly now, and Sarah could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the unit. She realized he was probably operating on very little sleep and possibly under the influence of substances that were affecting his judgment. "You'd really do that?" he asked. You'd stay with me? Yes, Sarah said without hesitation. I give you my word. This was the moment of truth. Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out on the man's face as he weighed his options. She knew from experience that people in crisis situations often needed someone to give them permission to make the right choice, to show them a path that allowed them to save face while de-escalating the situation. Slowly, very slowly, Mr. Patterson began to lower the gun. Sarah felt a surge of relief, but she also knew that the situation wasn't over yet. People sometimes changed their minds at the last second, especially when they saw police officers approaching. That's good, Sarah said encouragingly. You're making the right choice for Chloe. This is what a good father does. He puts his daughter's well-being first. The gun was now pointing toward the floor, but the man was still holding it. Sarah needed to get him to release it completely before the police moved in. Now I need you to set it down on the floor and step away from it, she said. Can you do that for me? For a moment, the man hesitated, and Sarah worried that he might change his mind. But then, with a movement that seemed to take enormous effort, he bent down and placed the gun on the floor, then stepped back with his hands raised. The response from the police was immediate. 3 officers rushed into the unit, weapons drawn but not pointed directly at Mr. Patterson. They moved with practiced efficiency, securing the weapon while giving clear, calm commands. Sir, I need you to get down on the ground with your hands behind your back, the lead officer said. We're going to sort this out, but first we need to make sure everyone is safe. Mr. Patterson complied without resistance, and Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her as she realized the immediate danger had passed. But even as the officers handcuffed the man, she kept her word by staying close and speaking to him in reassuring tones. You did the right thing, she told him as the officers helped him to his feet. I'm going to follow up on what we discussed about Chloe. Someone will be able to give you information about her situation. One of the officers approached Sarah. Ma'am, we're going to need a statement from you about what happened here. You've handled that situation exceptionally well. Sarah nodded, but her attention was already turning back to the patients and families who had been traumatized by the experience. Several children were still crying, and she could see that some of the staff members were shaken by what they had witnessed. Of course, I'll give you a statement, she said to the officer. But first, I need to take care of my patients. They've been through a traumatic experience, and they need immediate support. Dr. Chin appeared at Sarah's side, her face pale but determined. Sarah, that was... I don't even know what to say. How did you know how to handle that situation? Sarah looked around at her colleagues, all of whom were staring at her with mixtures of amazement, gratitude, and curiosity. She realized that her military background was no longer a secret, and that her quiet existence as just another pediatric nurse was probably over. I had some training in the army, she said simply. I was a combat medic for 8 years before I became a nurse. The revelation sent a ripple of surprise through the staff. Lisa Thompson, who had worked alongside Sarah for over a year, looked at her with wide eyes. You were in the army? She asked. In combat? Sarah nodded. 2 deployments to Afghanistan. I dealt with some difficult situations over there, and the training helped me today. Dr. Hoffman appeared, having been summoned by the emergency. She looked around at the scene, taking in the presence of police officers, the clearly shaken staff and families, and Sarah, who appeared to be the calmest person in the room. I need a full briefing on what happened here, Dr. Hoffman said. But first, I want to make sure all our patients are okay. Sarah, can you give me a quick assessment? Sarah immediately shifted back into her role as a nurse, conducting a rapid evaluation of each patient to ensure that none had been physically harmed or were showing signs of severe emotional distress. Her ability to transition seamlessly from crisis management back to normal patient care impressed everyone who observed it. As she worked, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her carefully constructed quiet life had just changed. For 2 years, she had successfully hidden her military past, preferring to be seen simply as a competent nurse rather than someone with a background in combat. but today's events had forced her to reveal skills she had hoped never to use again in civilian life. The truth was, Sarah had left the military because she was tired of violence and conflict. She had chosen nursing, and pediatric nursing in particular, because she wanted to use her medical skills to heal rather than to support combat operations. The irony that her combat training had been necessary to protect children in a hospital was not lost on her. But, as she looked around at the young patients who were now safe because of her actions, Sarah realized that her military experience wasn't something she needed to hide or be ashamed of. It was simply another tool in her arsenal of skills that she could use to protect and care for the people who needed her help. The quiet nurse who had blended into the background for 2 years was gone forever. But, in her place was someone who had proven that she could handle any situation that came her way, no matter how dangerous or unexpected it might be. In the hours following the incident, St. Mary's Hospital became a hub of activity that extended far beyond the normal bustle of medical care. News crews gathered outside the main entrance, drawn by reports of an armed man in the pediatric unit, and the nurse who had talked him down. Police detectives conducted interviews with staff members and witnesses, while hospital administrators worked to manage the crisis and ensure that normal operations could continue. Sarah found herself at the center of it all, though she tried to maintain her focus on patient care even as administrators, police officers, and reporters sought her attention. She had given her official statement to the police, describing the events in the clinical, factual manner she had learned during military debriefings. But the emotional impact of what had happened was more complex than any report could capture. Dr. Chen found Sarah in the break room during what was supposed to be her lunch break, though she had barely touched the sandwich she had brought from home. The psychiatrist looked tired but determined, carrying a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold hours ago. "Sarah, I wanted to check on you personally," Dr. Chen said, sitting down across from her. "You handled an incredibly difficult situation today, but I'm concerned about how you're processing it. Have you had a chance to talk to anyone about what happened?" Sarah looked up from her untouched sandwich. The question was fair, and she appreciated the concern, but she wasn't sure how to explain that dealing with armed, desperate people wasn't entirely new to her. In Afghanistan, she had encountered situations where injured soldiers or traumatized civilians had become dangerous to themselves and others. The skills she had used today were ones she had hoped never to need again, but they hadn't disappeared during her transition to civilian life. "I'm okay," Sarah said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. "It was scary, but everyone is safe, and that's what matters most." Dr. Chen studied her face carefully. "Sarah, I've been practicing medicine for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone handle a crisis situation the way you did today. Your colleagues are calling you a hero, but I'm more interested in making sure you have the support you need. Dealing with trauma, even when you handle it well, can have delayed effects." Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Hoffman appeared in the doorway of the break room. The head of pediatrics looked like she had been dealing with administrators, reporters, and concerned board members all afternoon, but her expression softened when she saw Sarah. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Dr. Hoffman said, "but I need to speak with Sarah for a few minutes. There are some things we need to discuss about today's events." Sarah followed Dr. Hoffman to her office, wondering if she was about to be questioned about her decision-making during the crisis. She knew that her choice to engage with the gunman rather than immediately evacuating could be seen as risky, even though it had worked out well. Dr. Hoffman closed the door and gestured for Sarah to sit down. Instead of sitting behind her desk in a position of authority, she chose the chair next to Sarah, creating a more informal atmosphere. "First," Dr. Hoffman said, "I want you to know that what you did today was extraordinary. You potentially saved lives, and you handled an impossible situation with remarkable skill and courage." Sarah nodded, unsure where this conversation was heading. "But," Dr. Hoffman continued, "I also learned today that you have significant military experience that wasn't included in your employment file. 2 deployments as a combat medic is substantial background that we weren't aware of when we hired you." Sarah felt her stomach clench. She had been worried that her hidden military background might create problems with her employment, especially now that it had become public knowledge. I didn't lie on my application, Sarah said carefully. I listed my military service and my medical training. I just didn't go into detail about the combat aspects of my deployments. Dr. Hoffman held up a hand. I'm not suggesting you did anything wrong. But I am wondering why you chose not to highlight experience that would have been seen as a significant asset in your nursing career. Military medics are highly valued in civilian healthcare. The question forced Sarah to confront something she had been avoiding for 2 years. Why had she hidden her military background? Why had she preferred to be seen as an ordinary nurse rather than someone with extensive trauma and emergency experience? I left the military because I wanted to get away from violence and conflict, Sarah said finally. I chose pediatric nursing because I wanted to focus on healing and caring for vulnerable people, not because of my experience dealing with dangerous situations. I guess I was worried that if people knew about my combat background, they would see me differently. Dr. Hoffman nodded thoughtfully. I understand that concern. But Sarah, what happened today proves that your military experience doesn't define you as a person focused on violence. Instead, it gave you tools that you used to protect children and families. That's the definition of a healer, not a warrior. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Dr. Chen entered, followed by Mike Rodriguez and Lisa Thompson. Both of Sarah's colleagues looked like they had something important to say. Dr. Hoffman, we're sorry to interrupt, Mike said, but we wanted to talk to Sarah, and we thought you should hear this too. Lisa stepped forward, looking nervous but determined. Sarah, we've been talking about what happened today, and we realized that we never really knew you. Not the real you. And we wanted to say that we're sorry if we made you feel like you couldn't share your background with us. Mike nodded in agreement. We've worked together for 2 years, and you've been an amazing colleague and friend. But today we saw skills and strength that we never knew you had. It made us realize that you must have felt like you couldn't be completely yourself around us. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had worked so hard to fit in as just another nurse that she hadn't realized how isolated she had made herself by hiding such a significant part of her life experience. It wasn't about trust, Sarah said. It was about wanting to leave that part of my life behind. I saw things and did things in Afghanistan that I didn't want to carry into my civilian career. I wanted to be just a nurse, not a veteran who happened to be a nurse. Dr. Chen leaned forward. But Sarah, today proved that you can't really separate those parts of yourself. Your military experience didn't make you violent or aggressive. It gave you the skills to stay calm under pressure and protect people who couldn't protect themselves. That's not something to hide from. It's something to be proud of. Over the following days, Sarah discovered that her colleagues' reaction was representative of the broader response to the incident. The local newspaper ran a story about the hero nurse, who had prevented a tragedy through her quick thinking and courage. But more importantly to Sarah, she found that her relationships with her coworkers deepened as she began to share stories about her military service and how it had shaped her approach to nursing. She learned that Mr. Patterson was receiving treatment for depression and substance abuse issues, and that his daughter Chloe was indeed in the hospital system, but at a different facility across town, where she was receiving treatment for leukemia. A social worker was working to arrange supervised visits once Mr. Patterson completed his treatment program. Sarah kept her promise to advocate for him, speaking to the social worker about his obvious love for his daughter and his potential for rehabilitation. The incident also led to changes in hospital security protocols and staff training. Sarah was asked to help develop crisis response procedures and to provide training for other nurses on de-escalation techniques. She discovered that she enjoyed teaching these skills, finding a way to use her military experience that felt positive and constructive. 3 months after the incident, Dr. Hoffman called Sarah into her office again. This time, the conversation was about a promotion opportunity. The hospital was creating a new position for a charge nurse with special responsibility for emergency response and staff safety, and they wanted Sarah to consider taking the role. It would mean more responsibility and higher visibility, Dr. Hoffman explained. But it would also allow you to use all of your skills and experience to their fullest extent. You wouldn't have to hide any part of your background anymore. Sarah thought about the offer carefully. For 2 years, she had tried to be invisible, to blend into the background and avoid attention. But the incident had shown her that hiding her abilities wasn't just limiting her own potential, it was potentially putting patients and colleagues at risk by not utilizing all available resources. "I'd like to accept the position," Sarah said. "But I have one condition. I want to make sure that other veterans who work here feel comfortable sharing their backgrounds. I think there are probably other people who are hiding valuable skills because they're worried about how they'll be perceived." Dr. Hoffman smiled. "I think that's an excellent condition. In fact, I'd like you to help us develop a veteran support program for our staff." As Sarah left Dr. Hoffman's office that day, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that Tuesday morning when she had spotted a dangerous man approaching the pediatric unit. She was no longer the quiet nurse who blended into the background. Instead, she had become someone who used all of her skills and experience to protect and care for others. The transformation hadn't been easy, and it had forced her to confront parts of her past that she had tried to leave behind. But it had also shown her that her military service wasn't something separate from her nursing career. It was an integral part of what made her effective in her role as a healer and protector. 6 months later, Sarah was settling into her new role as charge nurse when she received a letter that surprised her. It was from Mr. Patterson, who was now in a rehabilitation program and working toward reunification with his daughter. He thanked her for keeping her promise to advocate for him and for treating him with dignity during the worst day of his life. "You could have seen me as just a dangerous person with a gun," he wrote. "But you saw me as a father who was desperate to see his sick child. That made all the difference in how everything turned out." The letter reminded Sarah of why she had chosen to become a nurse in the first place, to help people during their most vulnerable moments, regardless of the circumstances that brought them to her care. Her military training had given her the tools to handle the crisis, but her heart as a nurse had guided her to see the human being behind the desperate actions. As she finished reading the letter, Sarah looked around the pediatric unit where she now worked as a leader rather than someone who tried to remain invisible. Her colleagues knew her full story now, and they respected her for all of her experiences, both military and civilian. The children and families they served benefited from her complete skill set, and she no longer felt the need to hide any part of who she was. The quiet nurse who had spent 2 years in the background was gone, but in her place was someone who had learned that true strength came not from hiding your abilities, but from using them in service of others. Sarah Martinez had finally found a way to be both a veteran and a nurse, and in doing so, she had become more effective at both roles than she had ever been when she tried to keep them separate.